For those who have careers that keep them out at sea for long periods of time, what is the creepiest thing you've seen out in the water? Not so much what I saw but what I experienced. I was once underway in the Gulf of Alaska during a November gale. Waves were up to 35 feet with some rollers hitting 45. An uncommon occurrence on the diesel-electric ship I was on was a cycloconverter tripping. When this happened, the ship would temporarily completely lose power and propulsion until some electricians could reset everything. This happened during that gale. I simply can't explain how strange it is for the boat you're on to all of a sudden go so quiet that you can clearly hear waves slapping the ship and metal bending and flexing. Knowing you're completely at the mercy of the sea. Knowing that if the ship lost its bearing and went beam to, there was a real possibility of capsizing. It's easy to forget when you're at sea that the only thing keeping you alive is a bunch of steel welded together. At that moment I was fully aware and it humbled me. Thankfully we trained frequently for this and had everything fired back up relatively quickly. Another time I recall was when the ship took a rogue wave. They are absolutely real and I believe they account for a massive number of shipwrecks. It was late at night and I was on the bridge. We were passing through a storm and we're taking the waves off the bow with no visibility. As the ship moves, there's normally a pretty standard pattern. You ride up a wave for a bit and then you fall down the wave for a bit. Well, we started riding up a wave and got to the point where we should have been starting or ride down, but we just kept climbing and climbing. And then it happened. We started our ride down the back of this massive wave. All of us braced ourselves and tried to find something to hold on to, but we all fell to the deck anyway. Anything that wasn't secured for sea fell down all around us. Manuals, tables, computers, printers, you name it. Our captain, who was sleeping, called up to the bridge asking if we hit something. It woke the entire crew up. Rogue waves are real, and they're terrifying. I can't imagine being in a smaller boat or taking one of them broadside. I was in the US Navy for about 10 years, and have tens of thousands of miles at sea in an aircraft carrier. Countless nights on the flight deck in the middle of the night and middle of the ocean. Creepiest, a huge patch of the ocean glowing. Like nuclear waste in The Simpsons glowing. I've seen bioluminescent algae of a few kinds and this was nothing like it. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Weirdest thing, hundreds of miles out to sea from land and there was a massive fire on the water. It was like the top of a gas refinery, but on the water with nothing under it but water. Flame going a few stories into the air. Saddest, a fellow sailor trying to jump overboard. He apparently got a Dear John email and pictures from his cheating wife and decided to end it. We were on the smoke deck, he bummed a cigarette, then asked the time, we said 2300. He replied, sounds like a good time to die, and in one motion tried to launch over the chest-high wall, with an opening to the water below. Luckily we were faster than him. We grabbed his legs and wrestled him down and laid on him and basically hog-tied him till the MAs, Navy cops, got there. Broke my heart because he was a good dude. I never saw him again. He got transferred off the ship shortly after. Not sure what happened to him, but I hope he's doing better. Funniest, 2 flying fish collide mid-air. I was smoking when we were in the Persian Gulf and saw the fish fly from a pretty far distance towards each other. I remember thinking, there's no fudgin' way they're going to hit them splat splash. I was in tears laughing but no one saw it. Everyone just thought I was a weirdo, but I got to see a miracle of nature lol. I was driving for Uber finishing my undergraduate degree. I picked up a Navy officer from Virginia. It was a long trip to visit family, maybe a 2-hour car ride. She served on the Nimitz in the mid-aughts. We got along really well, and by the end of the trip she asked me, in what I assumed was a joking manner, do you believe in aliens? Which I replied, well, it'd be pretty boring if we were alone. She repeated, no, I'm being serious, and trying to divert the conversation I said, well, if they exist, they probably would have killed us by now or be living among us, but who knows? She smiled at me and nodded. I asked, is there something you know that other people don't? But she wouldn't answer. The question was so far out of left field from the nice conversation we'd had for the past couple hours that it sticks in my head as unusual. The rest of our conversations were so grounded except for that moment. About a year later the UAP footage from the training exercises involving the Nimitz were released and my heart skipped a beat. The furthest I've ever been out to sea was bay fishing, so I'm not qualified to say based on my personal experience haha. But one story that scares the shite out of me is of a Chinese submarine that got caught in an eddy. Ocean eddies are kind of like enormous whirlpools. They can be at or below the water surface. Some are large enough to be seen from orbit. Anyway, this sub was caught in an eddy and was beginning to drift downwards towards crush depth. Obviously that's pretty scary, but what drives it over the edge to me is that the eddy was pulling them downwards in the direction of a trench. Since they're in a sub, they can't just see outside. It's almost like there was something in the trench that grabbed them and started pulling them down into the abyss. They jettisoned and eventually were able to break free before their sub was crushed and lost to the dark void forever. But the idea of your sub suddenly stopping, going in reverse against your will, and then realizing that you're headed towards an oceanic trench is just next level for me. I'm pretty grounded, but the ocean gets my imagination going. This powerful sub got caught by something and started getting dragged down towards a trench. Yeah, it was an eddy doing it, but yeesh. The imagination comes up with disturbing questions. Some 20 years ago? On the MV Explorer, since sunk, down near the Antarctic Circle, sailing around the bergs and occasionally making landfall. We rounded into a small bay area, and there, amongst the ice and coast was an unmarked sailing yacht. Which is odd as generally yachts have some identifying markings on them. To add to it, they didn't respond to any radio contact, and whilst I wasn't privy to the conversation, and it was a long time ago, some crew went across via Zodiac and were refused boarding. So basically a yacht, not a particularly large one, that was unmarked was hanging around in the inhospitable waters of the Antarctic and didn't want any help or contact. Not creepy, but totally weird. Two Chinese boats, like small, old, fishing vessels, meeting up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean like half a mile behind us. This was so random, within international waters but so freaking far away from China, I still wonder what the hell they were doing there. They had no AIS. The first one to arrive close by, passed next to us as if to check who we were and if we were keeping course, sailing vessel, and then went straight towards the other ship and mated. Maybe drug trafficking or maybe just fishing. But yeah, still pretty far away from their most likely official harbor and kind of weird. It was literally in the middle of the pond, around 10 degrees north of the equator, so not your typical fishing route. I used to be an oilfield diver in the Gulf of Mexico. I'd say about 80% of the dives I logged were at night. Mostly 500 feet and under DSVs. It's very eerie feeling sitting on the downline doing in-water decompression in the middle of night. I'd always ask topside to turn off my headlight. Like a worm on a hook. Just bobbing in the darkness. Somewhere in the Atlantic, nice cold as fudge night, decided to step out and look at stars. About 10 minutes on and a boat's mast pops up, sits there a few minutes and then back under. No alarms, nothing. Just some sub-boys getting a bit of late-night O2 in the middle of nowhere next to some friends. I am a recreational sailor who travels for weeks at a time at sea. I once saw a flame on the water not 10 yards from me. Just freaking burning at midnight. This sort of qualifies. Former Navy here. Somewhere off the coast of Italy saw a very, very small boat, not much bigger than a rowboat, about 9 or 10 miles offshore. This was sometime around midnight. There was no light from land, and no other ships around. It had a light. Our ship captain said it was a fisherman, and the fish would be attracted to the light at that time. Imagine being in a rowboat about 10 miles offshore in the middle of a pitch-black night, waiting to see what finds you. In 20 years the weirdest shite I've seen is other people that work out here. There's about 40% of the sailors like what they do and are good at it. Another 40% that are good at it, but would do something better if the money was right. But there's another 20%? If they lived ashore for more than 6 months a year they'd end up dead or incarcerated. There's no more west for them to go to, so they went offshore and became our problem. A dead human body. It was the tropics and it wasn't in good shape. We turned it over to the authorities at nearest land. There were enough teeth left to identify it by dental records. Here's hoping the man's family got closure. The body was double-bagged and stored in the walk-in freezer until our next port visit. There was quite a bit of cleaning and decontamination involved, but that's the gist of it. Not so much creepy, as eerie, but being out in the blue at night in a lightning storm in a slack wind. The ocean was very flat, no big rolling swells, just tiny little ripples. The whole world would be black, and then there would be a flurry of bolts, and the whole world would be silver. The ocean looked like nothing so much as aluminium foil that had been scrunched up and flattened out. The water looked like mercury, and all the little ripples made these very dramatic black shadows. Creepiest thing I've seen has definitely been seeing myself and other crewmates lose our minds. On one particularly awful voyage, everything that could go wrong went wrong and we found ourselves without food, water, and sleep for a very unhealthy amount of time. It started off with auditory hallucinations. Ships are noisy, and when you're going crazy, you begin to think those noises are talking to you. I heard children laughing, a choir singing, and creepiest of all, a particular splash sounded like it was calling my name from the sea. Combine that with visual hallucinations and then things get really terrifying. I was convinced we were in the desert at one point with sand all around us and mountains in the distance. Another crew member freaked out and told us we were about to run into an apartment building. The creepiest thing I saw was an all-black flying pig with red eyes on the bow. I think the scariest though was when someone was convinced we lost part of our crew overboard. It turned into a massive, delirious argument over where everyone was even though we were all accounted for. That trip was brutal, and the captain put us all in a terrible situation due to sheer incompetence. Other than that, there was this one time I saw 3 gigantic ships in the distance with no lights and they did not show up on AIS. Suddenly they were gone. It was extremely creepy.